Hello everybody, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 25th December 2024 and today we have some important articles for the discussion. And before discussing all these important articles today, we have one mains practice question. So first, let's try to discuss this mains practice question, and this is about good governance. And in fact, governance is a part of your UPSC General Studies Paper 2 syllabus, and therefore you could expect at least one or two questions from the governance section, and this is particularly about good governance, and good governance also a very important part of the syllabus, right? So in this context, there was an article in the Indian Express newspaper. So this is about the reforms that are required into the Indian civil services. So in this backdrop, there is a question. The question is, what are the core principles of good governance and how do they contribute to enhancing transparency and accountability in the public administration? So this is actually the question. Now, how we could actually structure this question, and that is very important. We need to structure this. First of all, you could write the definition of good governance, right? So in fact, World Bank has given a definition of good governance. You can write the definition of good governance, and you could also write the case studies as a best practices of good governance that are being followed in different states. So that makes your introduction more and more appealing and more attractive as well. And apart from that, you need to describe core principles of good governance. There are certain core principles of good governance, and it is very important that you should identify those core principles of good governance. And apart from that, in the second part of the answer, you need to write how these core principles of the good governance would contribute to enhancing transparency and accountability in the public administration. So we all knew that transparency and accountability in the public administration is a very important component, right? So in fact, if you look at your general studies paper 4 syllabus, so it very often emphasizes on the values of transparency and accountability into the public administration. Now, these core principles of good governance, how do they help in ensuring transparency and accountability into the administration? Now, when you're writing this particular part of the answer, it is very important that you need to mention some relevant examples along with these points, so that that actually makes your answer more and more appealing to the examiner. And apart from that, you could write a way forward, right? So a conclusion which consists of a possible suggestions about the good governance, and you could also write about minimum government and maximum governance principle as well in the conclusion. So that actually makes your conclusion more and more appealing. So in this image, you can see there are certain core principles of good governance, such as participatory and consensus oriented governance, transparency, accountability, being responsive, equitable and inclusive, effective and efficient, and it also follows the rule of law as well, right? So these are some certain core principles of good governance, and they're very important, right? So you can also start this introduction with the either definition, or you can also start the introduction with some current affairs relevant topic, but you could briefly describe good governance as well, right? So what is the definition of good governance? We could briefly describe. So recently, a probationary IAS officer, so she came under a raging storm for seeking special privileges and faking the certificate. So we all knew about this, right? This incident. So everyone knew about this incident, that she tried to fake certificates to claim disability quota to enter into the civil services, right? So that was unearthed, and UPSC has also taken action against her. And in fact, this brings light to several issues that have been impeding the effectiveness, particularly transparency and accountability of the civil services. And first of all, you could even describe there are certain issues, there are certain challenges which have been existing in the Indian civil services as well. So these challenges, issues which are existing in civil services are very important, right? Very important in the sense that you could mention them in your ethics paper, you could also mention them in your general studies paper, particularly the governance part where questions are being regularly asked. So we need to talk about this. So first and foremost, in Indian bureaucracy, red tapeism is one of the main problem that we need to talk about. So because of red tapeism, a negative image is being portrayed. Right, so it sends a wrong message into the larger public whenever bureaucratic apparatus has been believing in the value of red tapeism. So there is actually excessive paperwork and procedural formalities actually delaying the decision making process on the part of the administration. Now whenever the decisions are being delayed, so there is a high probability that that particular country or that particular organization may not welcoming the principles of ease of doing business, right? So delaying in decision making is not good for the governance and administration in the long term. For example, you could write examples like delay in project approvals by the administrative organizations and implementation of certain projects such as infrastructure development projects. So infrastructure development projects are very important, but when you delay those projects, generally what happens, the cost of those projects would further increase and it costs the exchequer of the government. So of course it is a problematic, and you could mention such examples in the answer. And apart from that, corruption is also another major problem that has been plaguing the civil services, because we very often see the instances of or incidents of corruption, embezzlement, or even misuse of public funds. And because of that reason, so efficient utilization of the public resources is always emphasized on when we talk about a prudency as a value into the civil services, the prudent use of public resources. For example, in Commonwealth Games, a scam is being highlighted where large scale corruption took place among politicians and among the officials as well. So you can mention such examples. Generally when you mention such examples, so you actually giving or making those arguments more and more credible as well as legitimate. And lack of accountability is another major area, right? So bureaucrats often often operate without a clear accountability. So you need to be answerable, right? So you need to be answerable for whatever decisions that you have been taking whenever you are in a public life, or whenever you're taking major decisions and that have a larger impact on the society. So therefore bureaucrats often operate without accountability, and that is the one of the main problem in the present day civil services, and this very often leading to the inefficiency, and this also leading to the collusive corruption as well. So for example, delayed or failed government schemes without any repercussions for the responsible official. So for example, any official is not doing his or her own duties, and they are not implementing the government welfare programs, and action is not taken against those officials. So right, so you can mention such example. And apart from that, political interference is another major problem that we mostly experience. So when we talk about the civil services, right? So because in fact it is expected that the civil servants would work under the the political masters. So therefore there is often the political interference in the functioning and transfer of civil servants, and that essentially compromises the independent and impartial functioning of the civil servants and affecting the overall efficiency and effectiveness of their functioning. So that is also another major problem. So you can also mention examples such as IAS officers like Ashok Kemka. They are being transferred very frequently for not aligning with the political interests. So however, there is a need to undertake certain measures to address these issues, right? So it is very important to address these issues. Now what are the measures that have to be taken to address these issues? Now first and foremost, it is very important that in civil services the procedures are becoming more and more complex, right? So more and more complex procedures have been leading to delays in decision making. They have been leading to the red tapeism. So therefore there is a need to simplify the procedures, right? So we need to simplify the administrative procedures to reduce the bureaucratic delays. So that could reduce the bureaucratic delays, and that could improve the ease of doing business, and that could improve the trust and goodwill of the people on the government, right? So those areas have to be adequately focused. And apart from that, strengthening anti-corruption mechanism is also another major area that the government and the bureaucrat or the civil services or the policy makers need to work on, right? So we already have such anti-corruption mechanisms, such as we have created Lokpal, we have created Lokayukta, we have Central Vigilance Commission, Central Bureau of Investigation. There are a lot of such bodies which have been existing as anti-corruption bodies, but there is a need to further strengthen these anti-corruption mechanisms, and that is in the best interest of the civil services, or efficient or effective civil services. And apart from that, we need to talk about enhancing accountability and transparency as well, right? So accountability in the sense that whatever decisions that you have been taken, you should be answerable to the public for those respective decisions. Now, whenever there is a higher accountability, or whenever there are mechanisms which ensure accountability of the civil servants, that makes him more and more responsible, right? So that's very important for any civil services. So there should be a frameworks so that actually establish a measurable outcomes from the civil servants. For example, introducing performance linked incentives, penalties for government schemes. And apart from that, there is also a need to reduce political interference, and political interference has been clearly plaguing the civil services or the public administration. So therefore, there is a need to set up mechanisms and frameworks that could reduce the interference of politicians into the functioning of civil servants. So therefore, there is a need to ensure fixed tenure. So there should be a fixed tenure for every civil servant. So they should not be transferred at the will of the politicians, and that is also very important. So ensure fixed tenures for key positions to ensure to reduce or to prevent arbitrary transfer of these civil servants. And apart from that, skill development and training of civil servants is also a very important component. So reducing training and regular training and capacity building programs to equip civil servants with modern skills, it is also very important, right? For example, the government of India launched Mission Karma Yogi, right? So Mission Karma Yogi is a mission that essentially focuses on capacity building of the civil servants and improving work culture, foster a culture of ethics, transparency, accountability within the civil servants. So these measures have to be taken. And apart from that, implementation of Right to Information Act, so that ensures transparency and accountability. And we could also emphasize us on e-governance, citizens charter, social audit, right? So all these things ensure more and more transparency and accountability, but these measures have to be taken in letter and spirit, so that ensure that protects the independence and impartial functioning of the civil services. And in fact, in conclusion, you can write this conclusion that we emerge from simply a rule-based state to a socialist and welfare-oriented state. Now, earlier Indian bureaucracy is known as a hierarchical bureaucracy, and in fact it is a rule-based bureaucracy. It is very objective in the sense that it strictly follows rules and regulations. But now we have been making a transformation from rule-based bureaucracy to more a socialist and welfare kind of a welfare-oriented state. And modern bureaucracy should also incorporate these features of smart governance, right? So the smart governance essentially include the aspects of simplicity, morality, accountability, responsibility, and transparency. So this smart governance is the need of the hour, right? So that's how you can actually conclude the answer. So we have some important topics which are given in today's newspaper. So let's try to discuss those topics as well. So the first topic is that government must not ape private sector's insecure gig work conditions. Now, one thing that we need to understand here is that a gig economy has been raising, and in this gig economy there are a lot of employees who are gig employees. However, the problem with the gig employees is that they lack security. Okay, so they lack insurance, they lack social security, and they lack job security, and they also facing a lot of problems because they're not permanent employees, they're just contract employees, and they have been facing a lot of problems. But recently the Supreme Court has issued directions or orders to the union government that government should not adopt or emulate the culture of gig workforce, where there is very often denial of social security benefits to the gig workers. And in this image, you could clearly see that there has been a rise in gig economy, right? So it is growing at a rate of 7.4% per annum, right? So this is how the gig economy has been growing. And first we'll try to understand the context. As I have already told you the context, that the Supreme Court has asked the union government that it should not emulate, or it should not adopt the culture of gig workers, right? So because government is already a largest employer of government is largest employer in the country, and it should not adopt, it should not emulate the culture of gig economy, where the employees very often deprived of the social security benefits. And that is what the Supreme Court has told the center, right? Now, government is one of the largest employers in the country, so it must not emulate precarious employment arrangements which are being seen in the private sector with rise in the gig economy. So this is what the Supreme Court has said with the center. Now, in this context, we'll try to understand what are the other aspects that the Supreme Court has actually told to the center. Now, in the private sector, we could see there is a rise in the gig economy, right? So in fact, with the rise in the gig economy, since gig employees are contract employees, so there's lack of job security, there's lack of social security for these gig employees. So their conditions, right? So the employment conditions are very often considered as precarious employment conditions or precarious employment arrangements. And in fact, as I have already told you, that these gig employees very often lack the social security benefits such as job security, insurance security. So they are not fairly treated, and they also lack the benefits which are essential and important. And in fact, so the government institutions which are being entrusted with upholding the principles of fairness and justice. So it is very often expected that whenever we have the government institutions, so those government institutions must uphold the principles of fairness and justice, particularly the social justice. And in fact, these government institutions should also bear the responsibility to avoid such exploitative employment practices. So government should not adopt such exploitative employment practices that we could generally see with respect to the gig economy, right? So gig economy is being characterized by lack of benefits, lack of job security, lack of social security, lack of fair treatment as well. Okay, so because of all these reasons, the Supreme Court has strongly asked the central government that it has the responsibility to avoid, it even have the greater responsibility to avoid such exploitative practices when it comes to the employment, right? So we'll understand the realities of the employment with the government, right? So in some departments within the government, very often employment has becoming continuous, and it has becoming long-term service, and it is indispensable, it is having indispensable duties, and also there is absence of any illegalities in their appointments. So this is the reality of the employment, and that's why the Supreme Court has actually asked the union government to ensure that the employment should not exactly similar to a gig employment, where workers or the employees very often experience the precarious conditions. And in fact, so when we talk about India's experience with the labor force or the workforce, now at the international level, there is an organization that is affiliated or that is under the UN system, that is International Labour Organization. So International Labour Organization deals with the rights of the workers throughout the world, and in fact India is one of the founding members of the International Labour Organization. And in fact, International Labour Organization, as I have already stressed on, it consistently advocated for the employment stability and also the fair treatment of the workers, whether public sector employees or even the private sector employees or even gig workers or the contract workers. But the International Labour Organization has been consistently emphasized on stability of the employment and also the fair treatment of the workers as well. So if you want, you can also go through the both pros and cons of the gig workers or these contract workers. For example, when we talk about the pros of the gig workers, so they have greater flexibility to work, right? So they can work at any time. So that is, they have the greater flexibility and they can do a diverse number of works, and increased independence and better work-life balance as well. So these are some of the advantages, some of the benefits of being part of the gig workforce. So there are certain cons as well, right? So what are the cons? For example, irregular income, complex tasks, no benefits, and fewer connections. So we can already talked about those those problems that the gig economy or the gig workers have been facing. Now when we talk about a gig economy, we'll try to understand this in a very broad way, right? So because it is also important that we should understand what exactly is the gig economy. So as I have already told you that whenever we talk about the gig economy, so gig economy is not a permanent employment under a firm, right? So this is a contract based employment, and it is also a short term employment under a firm. So once you finish that work, so your contract with the company will end. It is also more and more flexible as well, and the company will pay for your work, right? So you're not a permanent employee under that particular company, and this is a gig economy. So gig economy is a free market system in which organizations hire contract workers for a very short period of time. And there are a number of startups such as Ola, Uber, Zomato, Swiggy. Now, so we every day almost see such startups, right? So they deliver us food, they deliver us groceries and other important essentials to our doorsteps. So they are being part of this gig workforce or gig ecosystem in the country. And in fact, so all these startups that we have just discussed are the main source of gig economy in India. And in fact, the research studies by some agencies such as Boston Consulting Group or BCG have indicated that participation in gig economy is higher in developing countries. For example, India is a developing country, and India is a country which has been experiencing the higher levels of unemployment also. However, gig economy helps countries with the higher levels of unemployment, but because gig economy provides employment opportunities for the youth, right? So this Boston Consulting Group studies have been revealing that the gig economy is higher, so it has a higher presence in developing countries in the global south. So it is around 5 to 12% versus the developed economies, it is around 1 to 4%. And in fact, gig workforce is also expected to expand 2.35 crore workers by 2029 to 30. So this is what it has been predicted with respect to the gig workforce or gig economy. Now we have already discussed that what are the problems that the gig workers have been facing. So they have been getting lower wages for their work, and in fact there is also unequal gender participation in the gig workforce, and there is also lack of possibility of upward mobility within the gig workforce. And apart from that, we have also discussed that they lack the social security, and they also lack they will not be provided insurance. And apart from that, they have also been facing a lot of such issues, right? So we cannot say that they are permanent employees, right? So they're not permanent employees, they just work for a short time based on the contract with the company. So therefore, because of this particular reason, generally companies don't recognize these gig workers as their own employees or the permanent employees, and that's where the gap actually exists, right? So gig workers are typically hired by companies on a contractual basis, and they are not considered as their permanent employees, and because of this particular reason, so they do not receive some of the benefits that their employees under a firm have been receiving, and that's where it is becoming more and more problematic. and you can pause the video and you can also go through the benefits and the downsides of the gig economy. Now in this context, what the government should do? So the government certainly needs to bring in regulations with respect to the gig economy, and the government should extend social security benefits to all the workers, and the government should also try to fix a basic wages for the gig workers. So regulation is very important. So if there are no regulations, it will lead to the exploitation of the gig workforce. Now in this context, regulation is very important. So there should be a proper regulatory landscape, so that should be put in place here. And the next topic is quantum computing. In fact, this is a very important topic because quantum computing has been regularly in news. So you could expect at least one question in your mains examination of general studies paper 3 and also in your prelims examination, right? So it is very important that we need to understand what exactly is quantum computing, and what are the benefits, what are the advantages of the quantum computing, and what are certain limitations that we have been experiencing with respect to quantum computing that we need to understand in a very detailed manner. Now, what is a quantum computing? So that it has become, a buzzword that we hear this word almost like every day, right? So quantum computing is, a technology, a new technology that has been developing, and in fact that has a lot of potential. Even when you compare this quantum computing even with the supercomputing, so the quantum computers are much more powerful when it comes to solving the complex problems, complex mathematical problems. They are much more powerful, right? So that's why that's why countries have been emphasizing on quantum computing and quantum technologies. So we'll try to understand what exactly is this quantum computing. So quantum computing is rooted in quantum mechanics. So it is actually founded on quantum mechanics, and it is also promises to solve complex problems beyond the reach of classical computers, right? So we have a lot of classical computers, and these classical computers, like the conventional computers, may not be able to solve some complex problems that these quantum computers can solve those complex problems within seconds. See why it is important for us to solve such a complex problems. It is important in astronomical research, it is important drug design, drug discovery, and when we are preparing a new vaccine, when we are analyzing any other thing. So in all those different aspects, quantum computing plays a very important role. And in fact, this quantum computing was first proposed by Richard Feynman in the year 1982. Right, so he was the one, he first proposed quantum computing in the year 1982 to stimulate the quantum systems. And in fact, the classical computers as of now have been facing a lot of problems. However, the solution to the existing problems that the classical computers have been facing is the quantum computing. So quantum computing is the ultimate solution for the problems that the classical computers have been facing as of now. So since then, this progress includes development of qubits. Okay, so scientists started developing qubits, or the technological giants started developing qubits, and qubits are very important components of quantum computing, and these qubits are being developed using two different concepts, such one is superposition and another is entanglement. So we'll understand what is a superimposition and what is entanglement, right? So development of these qubits would improve error correction. So if there are any errors in the calculation, so those errors will be effectively corrected, and scalable hardware can be made, paving the way for applications in cryptography. For example, a blockchain technology. Bitcoin also works on the technology of cryptography or cryptocurrencies work on this technique and optimization, and even it has a lot of important applications in astrophysics, space technologies, and even drug designing and drug discovery. Now just we'll try to understand very briefly what is quantum computing. Okay, so what is the difference between classical computing and also quantum computing? So we'll try to understand this, right? So this is very interesting and very important as well, right? So understand, we use a lot of classical computers, right? So in classical computing, bits are being used as unit of information, right? So bits are being used as the unit of information, but on the other hand, quantum computing, qubits are being used as a unit of information. So in quantum computers, qubits are the fundamental units, but on the other hand, in classical computing, bits are being used as units of information. However, the classical computers that we very often see and we use, they operate based on the principles of classical physics, right? So they're very simple, and they work on the principles based on classical physics, the classical computers. And in fact, as we have already discussed, that bit is a basic unit of information in classical computers. So this is the basic unit of information, that is either 0 or being 1. Okay, so all types of information can be represented using combinations of zeros or ones in the binary system in these classical computers. Now, what is the advantage of quantum computers comparison to the classical computers? Now, when we talk about these quantum computers, as I have already told you, that these quantum computers uses qubits as the fundamental units. In fact, these quantum computers rely on quantum bits, or they are also being called as qubits, for computations, for calculation. And in fact, qubits can represent 0, 1, or a state that is partly 0 or partly 1 simultaneously. Okay, so they can represent either 0 or 1, or they can even represent partly 0 and partly 1 simultaneously as well. But on the other hand, it is not the case with the classical computers. They can either represent either 0 or either 1, but they can also partly represent 0 and partly represent 1 as well simultaneously, right? So for example, if you flip a coin, right? So if you flip a coin, so that coin can easily represent both sides of both sides, right? So when you flip the coin until it stops, so that's how these quantum computers actually work. And this ability to exist in multiple states, both states, is unique to qubits, and that enables quantum computations, and that also enable these computers to calculate complex things in a very simple, in a very fast manner, right? So what are a superposition and entanglement? These are two principles based on which the quantum computing actually works, right? So in fact, superposition is a key quantum principle in the quantum computing, because qubits can exist in a state of superposition. They holding both 0 and 1 at the same time. But it is not the case with the classical computers, because they can represent either 0 or 1. But the superposition in quantum computers, so they can hold both 0 and 1 at the same time. And this superposition in the quantum computers would enable them to perform multiple computations at once in a much more faster manner. And what is the entanglement, right? So it is also important to understand the entanglements also. So qubits can be entangled, so that means the state are intrinsically linked even if they are far apart. So that is what is known as quantum entanglement. For example, imagine that there are two coins. Two coins are far away, so far apart, and if you flip a coin, so you get one face of the coin, and even if that same coin exists far away, so that coin also represent the same face that we see here, right? So this entanglement, so that is what is called as entanglement, right? So this is a little bit complex, right? So this is what is called as entangle. So quantum entanglement actually means that the states are intrinsically being linked even if they are far away from each other, right? So measuring one qubit instantly provides information about other regardless of their distance. So whatever distance they are in, measuring one qubit instantly provides information about other qubit as well. So that's how entanglement and superposition in quantum computers generally work. However, there are certain advantages of quantum principles, so it is also important to understand the advantages of quantum computers, the limitations of quantum computers, right? So first, when we talk about the advantages, the superposition in quantum computers allows to process information, exponential information, process more and more data than the traditional classical computers, right? So in fact, the traditional classical computers or the supercomputers that we have, they cannot process exponentially high amount of data, but the quantum computers, using superposition, they can actually process a complex and a very high, huge amount of data in a very quick time, or in a very less time. And in fact, entanglement facilitates simultaneous information sharing and speeding up computations as well. And so these are the advantages of quantum computing. However, what are the recent achievements with respect to the quantum computing? So we should also briefly understand the recent achievements in the quantum computing. So first is Google's Sycamore processor. So that is achieving quantum supremacy. And so Google 53 qubit Sycamore processors has been invented. So that has solved a problem in just 200 seconds. Otherwise, it would take around 10,000 years to most powerful supercomputers that we have now, right? So for example, in India, we also have supercomputers like Param Shivai, and even tokamak is I think another in Japan also, China also, and in US also there are supercomputers. So those supercomputers would take around 10,000 years to process some information, but Google's 53 qubit Sycamore processor solved this in just 200 seconds. Now you can imagine the difference between 200 seconds and 10,000 years. And apart from that, this milestone has marked a quantum supremacy, where quantum computers very often outperform classical computers for the basic task. And that's how these quantum computers are very, very important. And apart from that, so recently in the year 2024 itself, Google has come up with another quantum chip called Willow. So Willow is another quantum chip that it is much more powerful than its earlier Sycamore processor, right? So it has came up with the quantum chip called Willow. Okay, so this Willow quantum chip, so that is the first quantum processor with error corrected qubits that improves as they scale in, right? So that would further improve itself when we scale in. And in fact, quantum error correction in this Willow quantum chip will maintain quantum states long enough for the meaningful calculations. And in fact, it is expected that Willow completed a standard test in 5 minutes, right? So Willow has actually completed a standard test in just 5 minutes. And in fact, this is the task that a supercomputer would take around 10 trillion years, right? So a supercomputer would take 10 trillion years, but this Willow quantum chip has processed that particular information in just 5 minutes. So you can imagine how powerful these quantum computers are. And if these quantum computers are increasingly being used, if we overcome the limitations of quantum computing, so you can imagine how a potential game changer these quantum computers are. However, they're not free from the challenges. There are certain challenges also with respect to these quantum computers. For example, building quantum computers is extremely expensive, and it is also technically very, very complex, right? So it is not easy because it actually cost us a lot of money, and it is also technically very, very complex to build these quantum computers. And also maintaining the stability of qubits is very, very challenging, because these qubits very often have a higher error rates, like a decoherence, which is being caused by the environmental noise as well. And another advantage, another limitations of this quantum computing is that the current quantum computers, so they have limited qubits but solving major problems such as drug discovery, drug designing, astronomical research, so that actually requires millions of qubits. And scaling quantum systems to such levels also remains a significant hurdle. So these are some of the limitations of quantum computing and what India has been doing in the area of quantum computing. So India has also launched National Quantum Mission in the year 2023, and this is India's commitment. So under National Quantum Mission, India has recognized the potential of quantum computing. And in fact, India has also launched National Quantum Mission in the year 2023. And when the government launched National Quantum Mission, it has allocated 6,000 crore over 8 years to advance quantum technology and also develop quantum computers as well, right? So these are some limitations, and this is National Quantum Mission, and those are some details with respect to the quantum computers and their ability to solve complex problems and also their ability to solve a huge information in a very quick time, right? So the next topic is an India-China reset. So we all knew that India-China relations are conflictual in nature, particularly with respect to the border issue, the line of actual control. And in fact, in 2017, there was a Doklam conflict, near the tri-junction of India, China, Bhutan, and Galwan clashes in the year 2020, where around 20 of Indian soldiers are being martyred. So therefore, recently a series of disengagement talks have been taking place between India and China. So according to scholars, these disengagement talks between these two countries and high level official meetings between these two countries are to some extent successful in disengagement of forces on either side of the line of actual control. Now in this context, the author has been exploring the ways through which both India and China can improve their relations, right? So both India and China have mutual suspicions against each other. Now how can India and China improve their relationships, and how this improvement in the relationship will benefit both India and China? This is what the author has been telling us, right? So the context is that, so we all knew that there is a long standing military standoff between India and China. So that was triggered by the violent confrontation in Galwan Valley in June 2020, right? So this a long standoff between India and China has ended because of the political authority that has lent disengagement agreement that was reached after a series of patient talks between the military and diplomatic teams of these two countries. So this is what the author has been telling us, that the disengagement process on either side of line of actual control has been completed because of a series of efforts by both military and the diplomatic individuals or diplomatic efforts. Now we all knew that now world has been, we are living in an uncertain world. The world has been facing many conflicts, for example Russia-Ukraine war, and this Israel-Hamas conflict, Israel-Iran conflict, and recent Syria issue. So we are living in an uncertain world, and in fact the election of Donald Trump as the president of US, so that would make the world more and more uncertain. Right now in this context, at a time when world has entered an era of growing geopolitical turbulence and uncertainty, right? So we could say that now the world has been entered into an era where there is a growing geopolitical turbulence as well as uncertainty. However, in this uncertain world, if China and India further continues their hostility, so that will further add to the burden of global uncertainty. So in this context, India-China hostility is not good for the global peace. So this is what the author has been suggesting. So therefore, cooperation between these two countries a dragon and elephant. So cooperation between these two countries will not only bring immense mutual gains. So the cooperation will actually benefit both China and India, but also make the world better and a safer place as well. So this is what the author has been telling us. In fact, so in order to improve the relations between if China wanted to improve its relations with India, and India also wanted to improve its relations with China, so a few things that both countries should do. So first, the author has been suggesting that China has to do certain things to improve its relations with India, right? So one is that we very often see that China considers Pakistan as an all-weather ally or an all-weather friend. So they very often describe their relationship, their friendship, as deeper than seas or deeper than the oceans, higher than Himalayas, sweeter than honey. So this is how they actually describe the relationship. And in fact, for India, cross-border terrorism emanating from Pakistan is a serious concern, right? So however, China very often turns a blind eye towards India's concerns with respect to Pakistan, and that is one of the main concern. Now in this backdrop, what author has been suggesting, that the first thing that China can do to earn the trust of India is that it must demonstrably convince India that it poses no threat to its national security now or in the future. So China will never be a threat to India now or in near future. So that assurance that China should give to India, and that is very important. Second thing China could do to earn the trust of India is China must not act in a manner that actually makes India suspect that it seeks to contain India's rise in Asia and also in the global scene. Now the author has been telling this in the context of the string of pearls policy of China. So string of pearls is a policy of China where China has been planning to encircle India by developing naval bases in different countries. And in fact, China has also been violating India's sovereignty by constructing China-Pakistan economic corridor that has been, laid down across the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, that is India's territory. Third thing that China could do is it must respect India as an equal pole in the multipolar Asia. So China always wanted a unipolar Asia. So unipolar Asia in the sense that only China is the sole superpower in Asia. So in Asia, there should be only Chinese dominance. But China should recognize India as an equal pole in the multipolar Asia and also in the multipolar world. And these three things that China must do if it wanted to earn the trust of India. And on the other hand, India should also do a certain things to improve its relations with China. So what are those things that India could do? Firstly, India should not enter into the alliances like Quad. So the author directly telling India that it should not join alliances like Quad because it could send a wrong message to China that India has been forming a counter China alliances, joining hands with adversaries like US. So therefore, the author has been clearly telling India that it should not join alliances like Quad. So India must not be guided by the misleading notion of power asymmetry between two countries, right? So power asymmetry in the sense that there's a huge difference between China and India in terms of development. China is a technology superpower, economic superpower, military superpower in comparison to India. So India should not be guided by a misleading notion of power asymmetry. So that would make India go very close to US. So that would send a wrong message. Secondly, the author has also been telling that India must not deviate from its one China policy. Now, what is one China policy? Now, one China policy is a policy so that says that Any country which wanted to have a diplomatic relations, a friendly relations with China, so that must recognize one China policy. That essentially means Taiwan is also an integral part of China, and Taiwan is not a separate country. Now, here the author has been suggesting that India must not deviate from its one China policy by appearing to support Taiwan's independence, or it should not play the Tibet card. Right? So India should not play Tibet card. India should not play the Taiwan card as well. Third, India does not allow the West's anti-China narratives to shape Indian medias and academias. Right, so this is what the author has been suggesting, that according to the author, his view is that Indian media is highly critical of China, but Chinese media is not critical of India. So Indian government and the ruling party must do something to stop Indian media being highly critical of China. So this is what the author has been suggesting. So the author has also told that he went to China, where he had seen that Chinese media, Chinese people were not very critical of India. So when Indian media is being highly critical, so that actually shape public's opinion about China. So that's where it could result in it could even impact the friendly relations between China and India. So that is what the author has been suggesting here. Right, so there are some trust building ideas that the author has provided. No doubt that China is now the second largest economy, and India is going to become the third largest economy very soon, but now India is the fifth largest economy in terms of GDP. Okay, so now it's the time that world's second largest and soon to be third largest economies to become partners in their respective domestic development. And in fact, the author has been suggesting that India's large and fast expanding market actually offers a growth opportunity for China's slowing economy, particularly in the backdrop of the trade war between US and China and Trump's re-election. So that could further fuel trade war fears. And apart from that, China, with its formidable strength in different areas such as infrastructure modernization, green energy and electric vehicles, and even several other breakthrough technologies. So China could actually provide a greater opportunities for India, particularly for the realization of India's aspirations to become a Vikasit Bharat, or the developed nation. Right, so this is what the author has been suggesting, that so when when you separate, when you set aside the differences among each other, so that would help realize your aspirations, and that would also help achieve the greater level of development, because you have the opportunities. So you should explore the opportunities by utilizing each other's strengths. Okay, so in this context, the author has been suggesting some way forward. So how India and China can improve their relationship. First and foremost, India cancelled direct flights from China to India during the COVID-19 outbreak. So India must restart those flights from Beijing to China, in New Delhi. Second thing that the author has been suggesting, that in recent times Indian government has stopped giving visas to Chinese technicians, Chinese businessmen, Chinese engineers, and also the scholars, tourists who wanted to come from China to India. So that's where the people to people contact has been missing. And in fact, recently there are being calls from different trade bodies that India should immediately resume giving visas to Chinese personnel. Right, so in this context, if we talk about number of visas are being given by different countries, so China has given around 2 lakh visas, right? So it has given 2 lakh visas in last year, and India has given only 10,000 visas. So that is also being pointed out by the author. And third, New Delhi and Beijing should reverse their decisions. that led to the exit of Chinese journalists from India and Indian journalists from China. So this should also be reversed by both countries. And fourth, Indian government has banned dozens of Chinese apps. So that's true. During COVID-19 pandemic, due to national security reasons, we have banned several Chinese apps because they have been stealing information, including the personal information, and they're being threat to our national security. Right, so in this context, the author has been suggesting to lift the ban on these Chinese apps. Right, so fifth, the two countries could quickly make big moves on trade and investment. Right, so in fact, the former chief economic advisor also suggested that yes, it is true that we have a huge trade deficit with China. That's true. Right, so the trade deficit amounting to more than 80 to 90 billion dollars with China. So how can we bridge that trade deficit? So the former chief economic advisor suggested that we could actually bridge that trade deficit by attracting more foreign direct investment from China. So therefore the author has been suggesting that this could be another way that through this way we can actually bridge the trade deficit, the trade gap. Right, so these are the views of the author with respect to improving India and China relations. Right, so that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.